The scent of fear has a metallic edge, like copper pennies held too long in a sweating palm. It filled the auction hall that night, mingling with expensive perfumes and the underlying musk of the wolves who had come to bid. I stood at the very back, my threadbare coat pulled tight around my shoulders, trying to be invisible among the wealthy pack members who wouldn't spare me a second glance. The rough wool scratched against my skin, a constant reminder of my place in this world, always on the periphery, always watching from the shadows. I wasn't supposed to be there at all. Omegas like me weren't welcome at the power exchanges, where alphas traded territories and sometimes, in the most shameful circumstances, other alphas were sold as property. Yet here I was, clutching a small velvet pouch containing every coin I'd saved over the past 3 years, working as a healer's assistant in the outskirts of the northern packlands. The weight of those coins represented countless hours of grinding herbs until my fingers bled, of staying awake for days tending to the sick, of being thanked with barely a mumbled acknowledgement before being dismissed from sight. "He's coming," someone whispered, and the crowd parted like a dark sea, the excitement and anticipation palpable in the air. I stood on tiptoes, my pale blonde hair falling from its loose knot as I strained to see over the shoulders of taller wolves. 4 guards dragged him in, chains of silver burning into his wrists and ankles. Even wounded and weakened, he moved with the deadly grace of an apex predator. His head remained unbowed despite the silver collar around his throat. And his eyes, gods, his eyes burned with such fury that several bidders stepped back involuntarily. The raw power emanating from him made the air thick and heavy, like the moment before lightning strikes. This was Riven, once the most feared alpha of the Western Territories. The wolf who had held the borderlands against the hunters for nearly a decade. The alpha who never lost a fight until betrayal brought him down from within. Stories of his exploits had reached even my remote corner of the northern pack. Tales of his tactical brilliance, his merciless justice against those who threatened the innocent, and his refusal to bow to the corrupt politics that infected most pack hierarchies. "Start the bidding at 1,000 gold pieces," announced the auctioneer, a thin man with eyes like a scavenger bird. "This specimen has been properly subdued but retains all the valuable qualities of a prime alpha. Strength, endurance, fighting skills, all at your command with the control of the silver bindings." My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I feared those nearest might hear it. What was I doing here? The small pouch in my hands contained exactly 1,008 gold pieces, everything I had in the world, payment for countless nights mixing poultices and setting bones, for being the invisible hand that brought comfort to the pack that barely acknowledged my existence. I had come tonight on an impulse I couldn't explain, drawn by rumors of this auction, and a strange, persistent dream that had plagued my sleep for weeks, a dream of chains breaking and moonlight streaming through forest leaves. My grandmother's voice seemed to whisper in my ear, an echo of the wisdom she'd passed to me along with her healing skills. "Power isn't always about strength, little one. Sometimes it's about being in the right place when everyone else is looking the wrong way. The quiet ones see what others miss." The small wooden pendant she'd given me, carved with ancient symbols of protection, pressed against my skin beneath my clothes, the only inheritance I had besides her knowledge. It felt warm against my chest, almost as if responding to the tension in the room. 1,000, called a voice from the front, belonging to a corpulent alpha from the southern packs, known for his cruelty to those beneath him. His reputation had spread even to our isolated community, stories of omegas who disappeared, of challenges that ended with suspicious deaths, of territory expanded through intimidation rather than fair contest. I clutched my pouch tighter, feeling the hard edges of the coins dig into my palm. 1,500, countered a female alpha, her cold beauty matched by the calculation in her eyes. I recognized her as the leader who had expanded her territory by marrying and then mysteriously outliving 3 alpha males. Her nails were painted blood red, tapping impatiently against her thigh as she assessed Riven like he was a prize stallion rather than a person. Riven's eyes surveyed the crowd, his face a mask of controlled hatred. When his gaze swept over the back of the room, I instinctively shrank further into the shadows, pressing my back against the rough stone wall. But for the briefest moment, his eyes met mine, and something passed between us, recognition perhaps, though we'd never met. I felt it like a physical touch, the connection between two souls who understood what it meant to be underestimated and overlooked. In that fleeting second, I saw beyond his rage to the pain beneath it, the wounded pride of someone who had never expected to be brought so low. 2,000, called another voice, a lean alpha with cold eyes, and a scar running from his temple to his jaw. The bidding climbed. Each increase was a knife in my chest. How could they bid on a person, an alpha, as if he were livestock? I had heard of Riven's downfall, of course. Everyone had. The betrayal by his second-in-command, the night attack when he'd been weakened after defending the borders, the rumors of forbidden magic used to subdue him. But seeing him here, bound and being sold like property, made the injustice visceral and raw. My nails dug into my palms as I watched these powerful wolves treat him as a commodity to be traded. 3,000, called the Southern Alpha, and my heart sank. The bidding had already tripled my life savings. A murmur ran through the crowd. This was an extraordinary sum, even for an alpha of Riven's reputation. Then something strange happened. The female alpha withdrew with a gesture of irritation, her face suddenly clouded with confusion. 2 other bidders conferred quietly, and then sat down. Their earlier eagerness evaporated like morning dew. Within moments, the once eager crowd seemed to lose interest, leaving only the Southern Alpha's bid standing. 3,000 going once, called the auctioneer, confusion evident in his voice as he glanced around at the suddenly passive audience. I looked at Riven again, and saw his eyes were closed, his face tight with concentration, despite the silver burning his skin. A vein pulsed at his temple, and a thin trickle of blood ran from his nostril, quickly wiped away before the guards could notice. A suspicion formed in my mind. Was he somehow influencing the crowd? Even through silver bonds, was his alpha power reaching out to dampen their interest? I had heard whispers of alphas with such abilities, though they were rare and often hunted for that very gift. 3,000 going twice. The auctioneer's voice held a note of disappointment. Clearly he had expected a bidding war over such a prize. My hand raised itself before my mind could catch up with the recklessness of my action, my grandmother's pendant burning hot against my skin as if urging me forward. 1,008 gold pieces, I called, my voice stronger than I felt, cutting through the silence like a blade. The crowd turned as one, faces registering shock that an Omega, recognizable by my scent even across the room, would dare to bid. The auctioneer's face flushed with anger at my presumption, but greed won out as his eyes flickered to my small pouch. The Omega at the back offers 1,008, a rather specific amount, he said, generating cruel laughter that rippled through the hall. Do I hear 3,100 from anyone else? The Southern Alpha turned, his eyes narrowing as he assessed me, taking in my simple clothes and unassuming stance. For a moment, fear clutched at my throat. If he raised his bid, my intervention would be for nothing, but something flickered in his eyes. A moment of confusion, then dismissal. Let the little Omega have him, he said finally, waving a dismissive hand. The silver has likely damaged him beyond repair anyway. Not worth my coin. A murmur ran through the crowd. Everyone knew he was lying. An alpha like Riven, even weakened, was worth 10 times the bidding amount. Something else was at play. Perhaps politics I couldn't understand, or some hidden agenda. But I didn't care about the reason for my unexpected victory. The auctioneer's gavel fell with a crack that seemed to echo in my very bones, and suddenly, impossibly, I had purchased an alpha. The guards thrust Riven toward me as the crowd dispersed, already turning to more interesting auctions. I handed over my pouch of coins with trembling fingers, watching as the auctioneer counted each piece with greedy precision, holding some up to the light to verify their authenticity. The control key, he said finally, handing me a small silver instrument with intricate engravings along its handle. It locks and unlocks the bindings. Be careful, Omega. This one has killed for less offense than a presumptuous purchase. Riven stood before me, towering and silent. Up close, I could see the silver had left burning tracks across his skin where it touched him. His dark hair hung in matted strands around a face that might have been handsome, before pain and rage carved new lines into it. Blood had dried in the corner of his mouth, likely from biting his tongue to avoid giving his captors the satisfaction of hearing him scream. Despite his wounds and chains, he carried himself with a dignity that made me acutely aware of my own disheveled appearance. "Come with me," I whispered, turning quickly toward the exit. I didn't look back to see if he followed, but I heard his labored breathing and the drag of the chains behind me. Each step seemed to take forever as we crossed the auction hall, eyes following our strange pairing. The broken Alpha and the insignificant Omega who had claimed him. The night air hit us like a blessing after the stuffy auction hall, cool and clean compared to the atmosphere of greed and desperation we'd left behind. I led him through back alleys, avoiding the main streets where questions might be asked about an Omega, leading a bound Alpha. My small healer's cottage lay at the very edge of the pack territory, isolated by both geography and the superstitious fear many wolves had of healing magic. The path grew steeper as we approached, winding through a copse of silver birch trees, whose leaves whispered secrets as we passed. Once inside, I bolted the door and turned to face my purchase. In the warm glow of the hearth fire I'd left burning, his shadows seemed to stretch across the walls, turning him into something larger and more dangerous than the wounded creature I'd brought home. "Why?" he asked, his voice a rasp of disuse and pain, but with an underlying strength that sent a shiver down my spine. "I need to remove those silver bindings before they poison you further," I said, avoiding his question. "Sit by the fire." To my surprise, he complied, lowering his powerful frame onto my small wooden chair. I approached cautiously, the control key clutched in my hand, aware that once those chains were removed, nothing would prevent him from killing me where I stood if that was his desire. "This might hurt," I warned, close enough now to see the golden flecks in his amber eyes. "Everything hurts," he replied, his eyes never leaving my face, searching for something. Deception, perhaps, or fear. I inserted the key into the lock at his collar and turned it. The mechanism released with a click, and Riven let out an involuntary sound, half groan, half growl, as the silver parted from his burned skin. I worked quickly after that, removing the cuffs at his wrists and ankles, trying not to flinch at the severity of the wounds beneath. The flesh was raw and blistered, with black veins spreading outward from the contact points, clear signs of silver poisoning. "Block 2. You have herbs for these burns," he said. It wasn't a question, but a statement of certainty as his eyes scanned my cottage, taking in the bundles of dried plants hanging from the rafters and the shelves lined with jars of various sizes. "Yes, I'm a healer." I moved to my shelves, selecting jars of salve made from comfrey and silverleaf, the only plants known to treat silver poisoning. My fingers trembled slightly as I collected my supplies, acutely aware of the unbound Alpha watching my every movement. "But it will take time. The silver has been against your skin too long. Time is something I suddenly seem to have," he said, watching me with unreadable eyes as I returned with my supplies. "You haven't answered my question, little healer. Why would an Omega spend every coin she has to purchase an Alpha she doesn't know?" I dipped my fingers into the salve and carefully began applying it to the angry red line around his neck. His skin was fever-hot beneath my touch, and I could feel his pulse racing beneath my fingertips. Strong and vital despite the abuse his body had endured, because what they did to you was wrong, I said simply, and no one else was going to stop it. He caught my wrist, his grip firm but not painful. The sudden contact sent a jolt through me, not entirely unpleasant. "That's not enough of a reason to empty your savings, little one." My grandmother's pendant seemed to pulse warmly against my skin as I met his gaze steadily. It was enough for me. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight release of the tension in his jaw. He released my wrist and allowed me to continue treating his wounds in silence. As I worked, I became aware of how intimate this interaction was, my hands on his skin, his breath occasionally catching when I touched a particularly sensitive area. For an Omega to touch an Alpha this way, especially one unrelated by blood or pack bonds, was almost unheard of. Yet here we were, the normal hierarchies temporarily suspended in this small cottage at the edge of the world. "Your hands are skilled," he said, after some time had passed. "You've done this before. Treating silver burns?" I asked, moving to his wrists. "Rarely. Silver weapons are expensive and difficult to come by, but I've treated many wounds of different kinds. You're young for a healer with such experience. I nodded, not looking up from my work. My grandmother taught me from the time I could walk. She was the pack healer before me. When she died, I inherited her position, though many would have preferred someone else. Someone born to our pack, not brought in as a cub. So you're an outsider too, he said, his voice softer now. This made me glance up, surprised he had caught the nuance. My mother came here pregnant and alone when I was not yet born. They took her in, but never fully accepted her, or me. When she died, bringing me into this world, my grandmother raised me. She was respected enough that no one questioned it. And now she's gone, leaving you alone among those who tolerate rather than welcome you. It wasn't a question. I nodded, uncomfortable with how easily he read my situation. They need my skills more than they need to like me. Riven's laugh was rough, like a blade that had rusted with disuse. Necessity makes for strange bedfellows. Today, it's made you the owner of an alpha. I flinched at the word owner. I don't think of it that way. I couldn't leave you there. Why not? Many would say I deserved my fate, that my downfall was inevitable for an alpha who refused to play by the old rules. I finished with his wrists and moved to kneel before him, beginning work on the angry burns circling his ankles. The silence stretched between us as I considered his question. My grandmother used to say that there are two kinds of justice, I finally answered. The kind that makes examples, and the kind that makes things right. What they did to you might be the first kind, but it's not the second. His hand came to rest lightly on the top of my head, an unexpected gesture that made me freeze. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. I would have liked to meet her. She would have liked you, I said with certainty, resuming my work. She had no patience for politics or posturing. By the time I had treated all his silver burns, the fire had burned low, and Riven's breathing had slowed to a steadier rhythm. The worst of the black veins had receded from his wounds, though the skin remained angry and blistered. You need rest, I told him, gathering my supplies. And clean clothes. I might have something that could fit you. I didn't mention that the clothes had belonged to a beta male patient who had died last winter despite my best efforts. Some truths weren't necessary to share. Later, as I showed him to the small spare room where he could rest, he paused at the threshold. The space was simple. A narrow bed, a small table, a window that looked out onto the forest beyond. But it was clean and warm, far better than the cell he must have been kept in before the auction. What is your name? He asked, as if just realizing he didn't know it. Elena, I replied. Elena, he repeated, as if testing how it felt on his tongue. You have made a dangerous purchase tonight, Elena. When dawn comes, you may regret your compassion. With that cryptic warning, he closed the door between us, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and the lingering scent of an alpha, wild and dangerous, now residing under my roof. I moved through my nightly rituals in a daze, hardly believing what I had done. For years I had lived quietly, keeping to myself, drawing as little attention as possible. Now I had spent everything I owned to buy an alpha who was not only powerful, but notorious. A wolf whose very name caused packs to strengthen their borders. As I washed my face in the basin, I caught sight of my reflection in the small mirror above it. My pale blonde hair hung loose around a face too thin by pack standards, with eyes a clear gray that my grandmother had called truth-seeker's eyes. Nothing about me suggested boldness or courage, yet tonight I had done something that defied explanation even to myself. I slept fitfully that night, waking at every creak and settling sound of the old cottage, but exhaustion eventually claimed me. And when I finally surrendered to deep sleep, I dreamed of running through moonlit forests, alongside a great dark wolf, whose eyes held the wisdom of ancient pain and the promise of protection. When morning light filtered through my windows, I woke with a start, remembering all at once what I had done. I threw on a simple dress and hurried to check the spare room, half expecting to find it empty, my unexpected guest having disappeared in the night. Instead, I found the door open and the room vacant, but sounds coming from my small kitchen. I followed them to find Riven standing at my wooden table, his powerful frame making the space seem suddenly too small. He had found clean water and was attempting to wash the remaining grime from his face and arms. The wounds where the silver had burned him looked angry and red, but no longer had the ominous black tinge of active silver poisoning. He turned as I entered, and the morning light revealed him transformed from the prisoner of last night. Even wounded and wearing the 2 small clothes I had left for him, he emanated the unmistakable presence of an alpha in his prime. His dark hair, now clean, framed features that were all sharp angles and hidden strength. His eyes, a deep amber that seemed to hold golden flecks when the light caught them, assessed me with new clarity. "Good morning, Elena," he said, his voice stronger than it had been last night. "It seems I owe you more than I realized. The silver would have killed me by midday without your intervention." I moved to the hearth, busying myself with stoking the fire and setting water to boil. "You needed help. I'm a healer. It's what I do." "Is it what you do to spend every coin you possess on strangers at auctions?" he asked, the question deceptively light. "No," I admitted. "That was unusual." "Indeed." He leaned against the wall, watching me with that intense gaze. "Do you know who I am? Beyond my name?" I nodded, keeping my hands busy with preparing a simple breakfast. "Riven of the Western Territories, Alpha of the Shadow Pack, Guardian of the Wild Borderlands, former Alpha," he corrected, a flash of pain crossing his features. "My pack is lost to me now." I paused in my work, meeting his gaze directly. "Is it? They say you were betrayed, not defeated." His eyes narrowed. "You know more than most." I shrugged, returning to slicing bread. People talk freely around an omega they consider insignificant, especially when that omega is treating their wounds or brewing their remedies. "And what else have you heard in these unguarded moments?" he asked, moving closer, his presence filling the small kitchen with an energy that made the air feel charged. "That your second in command, Varen, conspired with the Northern Council to ambush you after you'd been wounded defending your borders against human hunters. That he used forbidden silver magic to weaken you before you could heal. That he now calls himself Alpha of your pack, though many still whisper your name in loyalty." Riven's hand clenched into a fist, the only outward sign of the rage that must be consuming him. "And knowing all this, you still brought me into your home? Varen has spies everywhere, hunting for any who might shelter me." Fear flickered through me at his words, but I pushed it aside. "My cottage is remote. Few from the pack come here unless they're injured or ill, and fewer still pay attention to where an omega goes or what she does. Your insignificance as a shield," he mused. "Clever, but it won't protect you if they discover what you've done." I placed a plate of bread and honey before him, along with a steaming mug of herbal tea infused with healing properties. "Perhaps, but what's done is done." He accepted the food with a nod of thanks, but didn't immediately eat. Instead, he studied me with an intensity that made me want to look away. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Last night, you purchased me," he said finally. "Under pack law, that makes me your property until you release me or I pay the debt." I shook my head vehemently. "No. I bought your freedom, not you. You owe me nothing." His laugh was short and without humor. "Pack law doesn't recognize such noble intentions, little healer. In their eyes, and in the eyes of any who heard the auctioneer's gavel fall, I belong to you now." "That's ridiculous," I protested. "You're an alpha, I'm an omega. Such an arrangement goes against nature itself, does it?" He tilted his head, regarding me curiously. "Or does it simply go against the artificial hierarchies we've built around our true natures?" Before I could respond to this philosophical turn, he closed the distance between us in a single fluid movement that reminded me of just how dangerous he was, silver poisoning or not. His hand cupped my cheek, gentle despite the strength I could feel coiled within him. "The law provides only one way for an alpha to acknowledge such a debt and maintain his honor," he said, his voice dropping to a register that sent a shiver down my spine. "By claiming the one to whom the debt is owed." My breath caught. "Claiming? You can't mean—" "A claiming of protection, Elena. A public declaration that you are under my guard. That any who harm you answer to me." His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, the touch feather-light. It's the only way to ensure your safety once word spreads of what you've done. I stepped back, needing distance to think clearly, but that would mean that I stay, that I heal, that I rebuild my strength here, with you, until I can reclaim what was taken from me. His eyes burned with a determination that was almost frightening in its intensity. And in return, no harm comes to you for the mercy you've shown me. The pendant at my throat seemed to warm against my skin, almost as if responding to his words. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. Sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to accept help, little one. I stared at Riven, the implications of his words sinking in. A claiming, even one of protection rather than mating, was no small thing. It would bind us together in the eyes of all packs, placing me under his authority while simultaneously elevating my status. The Omega who had somehow earned an Alpha's protection. The pack will never accept it, I said finally, turning away to hide the confusion of emotions crossing my face. An Alpha claiming an Omega from outside his own pack. They'll say you're weakened from the silver, that your mind is affected. Let them say what they will, Riven replied, his voice hardening. I've never much cared for the opinions of those who hide behind tradition when it suits them, and abandon it when it doesn't. I busied myself with gathering herbs from the drying racks, needing something to do with my hands. And what happens when you're healed, when you go back to reclaim your territory and your pack? What becomes of me then? The question hung in the air between us, unavoidable and heavy with implications. I heard him move behind me, felt his presence like a physical force against my back, though he didn't touch me. You would have choices, Elena, more than you have now. You could come with me. Take your place as a healer in a pack that would value your skills rather than merely tolerate them. Or you could stay, but with the protection of my name, and the knowledge that you have an ally should you ever need one. I turned to face him, clutching a bundle of dried silverleaf to my chest like a shield. Why would you offer this? You don't know me. I know enough, he said simply. I know you spent everything you had to save a stranger. I know your hands are gentle even when your words are direct. I know you see injustice and act instead of looking away. He took the herbs from my hands and set them aside, his movements deliberate and careful. In my experience, these things tell me more about a person than years of acquaintance might. Something in his words resonated with a loneliness I'd carried for so long I barely recognized it anymore. To be seen, truly seen, was a gift I hadn't expected. If I agree to this claiming, I said slowly, what would it entail? A simple ceremony, words spoken before witnesses, a mark to signify the bond. His fingers brushed against the side of my neck, causing my pulse to quicken. Nothing that cannot be undone when the time comes, if that's what you wish. And if the Northern Council discovers you're here? If Varen sends his hunters? A dangerous smile curved his lips, transforming his face into something both beautiful and terrifying. Then they will learn why the Western territories remained unconquered under my watch. That afternoon, Riven insisted on accompanying me to the village center. I had argued against it. He needed rest. The silver poisoning wasn't fully purged from his system. We should wait until his strength returned. But he was adamant. The longer we wait, the greater the risk, he said, as he donned the clean clothes I had found for him. Simple garments left by a patient, but somehow they looked different on his powerful frame. Rumors spread. Questions will be asked about where you got the money for last night's auction. Better to establish our position now, while we still have the element of surprise. And so we walked together down the path that led from my isolated cottage to the heart of the Northern Pack's territory. I was acutely conscious of the stares that followed us, the Omega healer whom most ignored except when they needed her skills. Now walking beside an Alpha whose very presence seemed to command the attention of everyone we passed. Riven walked with the confident grace of a predator, showing no sign of the wounds that I knew still pained him. His hand rested lightly at the small of my back, a gesture that was both protective and possessive. The touch sent a constant awareness tingling through me, making it difficult to focus on anything else. As we neared the village square, I saw a group of the pack's higher-ranking members gathered near the well. Among them was Thorn, the Northern Pack's Alpha, a hard man with cold eyes who had never shown me anything but thinly veiled contempt. Beside him stood his mate, Serena, whose beauty was matched only by her ambition. "Courage, little healer," Riven murmured as he felt me tense. "Remember, you've faced worse than their disapproval." Had I? I wasn't sure, but his confidence bolstered mine, and I straightened my spine as we approached the gathering. The conversations died away as we drew near, replaced by a stunned silence. Thorn stepped forward, his expression a mixture of shock and outrage. "What is this?" he demanded, his gaze flicking between us. "Why is this?" He hesitated, clearly searching for a word other than prisoner. "Alpha in my territory?" Riven's hand remained steady at my back as he addressed the Northern Alpha. "I am here as a guest of your healer," he said, his voice carrying easily across the square. "And as of today, as her protector." Murmurs erupted from the gathered wolves. Serena's perfect features contorted with disdain. "An Omega? You claim an Omega as yours?" "The silver has addled your mind, Riven of the West." I felt a tremor of fear run through me at her open disrespect. But Riven merely smiled, a cold, dangerous expression that made several of the watching wolves step back. "I claim what is mine by right," he said clearly. "Elena purchased my freedom with every coin she possessed. Under pack law, that creates a debt that can only be satisfied through claiming. I stand by the ancient ways, even if others have forgotten them." Thorn's face darkened with anger. "You bring your politics and your enemies to my doorstep, Riven. The Northern Pack wants no part in your war with Varen. I bring nothing but myself and my honor," Riven countered. "If Varen's reach extends even here, perhaps you should question who truly threatens your security." The implication hung in the air that Thorn was either allied with or afraid of Varen. Either way, it was not a flattering suggestion. Before Thorn could respond, an older wolf pushed through the crowd. I recognized him as Gregor, the pack's eldest member and keeper of their histories. His weathered face was solemn as he studied us. "The Alpha speaks truth," Gregor said, his voice cracking with age but carrying authority nonetheless. "The law of debt and claiming is one of our oldest traditions. If the healer purchased his freedom, he has the right to claim her protection. It is the honorable path." Thorn looked as if he wanted to argue, but even he would not contradict the pack elder on matters of ancient law. Instead, he turned his glare to me. "Is this true? Did you purchase this Alpha at auction?" I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every stare. "Yes, Alpha. I did." "With what resources?" he demanded. "You are an Omega with no family, no standing. Where did you get such funds?" "From healing," I answered, finding strength in the simple truth. 3 years of saving every coin given to me for my services to this pack and others. This caused another ripple of murmurs. Few had considered that the quiet healer they barely acknowledged might have been accumulating anything of value. Gregor nodded, as if this confirmed something for him. "The claiming is valid then, if both parties consent." He looked at me directly. "Do you accept this Alpha's claim of protection, healer?" The moment stretched, time seeming to slow as I considered all that this would mean. Riven's hand pressed slightly firmer against my back, not pushing, but reminding me of his presence, his strength. I thought of my grandmother's pendant, warm against my skin, and her words about being in the right place when others looked the wrong way. "I accept," I said, my voice clearer and stronger than I had expected. Gregor nodded again. "Then by the old laws, let it be witnessed. Riven of the Western Territories claims Elena, healer of the Northern Pack, under his protection. Any harm that comes to her is harm to him. Any insult to her is an insult to him. So it is spoken. So it shall be. So it shall be," repeated several voices from the crowd, tradition compelling them to acknowledge the claiming even if they disapproved. Thorn's face was thunderous, but he could do nothing to prevent what had just occurred without violating pack law himself. "This changes nothing about your status within this pack," he snapped at me. "You are still subject to our rules, our authority." "Of course," I agreed, lowering my eyes in a show of submission that I didn't entirely feel. "I remain the pack's healer, as always." Riven's hand moved from my back to my shoulder, a gesture that was unmistakably protective. "And I remain her guardian, as witnessed here today." I trust that will be respected, Alpha Thorn. The challenge in his voice was subtle but unmistakable. For a moment, I thought Thorn might attack. His body tensed, and a low growl built in his chest. But Serena placed a restraining hand on his arm, her calculating eyes assessing the situation. "We have more important matters than this. Unusual arrangement," she said smoothly. "The council emissaries arrive tomorrow. Let's not have them find us squabbling over ancient laws and omegas." The mention of council emissaries caught my attention, and I felt Riven stiffen beside me. The Northern Council had been involved in his betrayal, according to the rumors. Their presence here, so soon after his escape, could not be coincidental. Thorn allowed himself to be placated by his mate's words, though his glare promised this wasn't over. "See that you keep to your healer's cottage and out of pack business," he warned us before turning away, the gathering dispersing in his wake. As we walked back toward my cottage, I could feel the change in the air around us. Word of the claiming would spread through the pack like wildfire, and by nightfall, everyone would know that the Omega healer had somehow secured the protection of one of the most feared alphas in the territories. "Council emissaries," I said quietly, once we were away from listening ears. "That can't be good." "No," Riven agreed, his face grim. "Varen works quickly. He must have suspected I would seek shelter in the Northern Territories after my escape. But how would he know to look here specifically? This pack is small, relatively insignificant in the greater politics of the territories." Riven's eyes scanned the forest around us, as if expecting threats to materialize from the shadows between the trees. Varen has always excelled at ferreting out the unexpected, and he knows I would avoid the obvious sanctuaries. A chill ran through me as I considered the implications. "We've just announced your presence to the entire pack. If there are spies, they already knew," he interrupted. "But now they also know you're under my protection. That changes their calculations." We walked in silence for some distance, the weight of what had transpired settling between us. The claiming ceremony had been brief, nothing like the elaborate rituals I had heard described for mating claims, but it felt no less significant. Something fundamental had shifted in my world, and I was still trying to understand all the implications. "What happens now?" I asked as my cottage came into view, its simple structure somehow more vulnerable looking than it had seemed that morning. Riven paused, turning to face me fully. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows across his face and highlighting the gold in his amber eyes. "Now we prepare," he said simply. "The council emissaries will bring news of me, perhaps even a bounty. Varen will have ensured that. We need to be ready." "Ready for what?" His hand came up to cup my face, the gesture surprisingly gentle from someone capable of such violence. "Ready to fight, if it comes to that. Ready to run if we must." His thumb brushed across my cheekbone. "Ready to face whatever comes next, together." The word "together" hung in the air between us, weighted with possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider. For so long I had been alone. The outsider, the orphan, the Omega whom others sought out only when they needed healing. The idea of facing the future with someone at my side was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. "I don't know how to fight," I admitted. "I'm a healer. I fix things. I don't break them." A smile touched his lips, warming his severe features. "There are many ways to fight, Elena. Not all require claws and teeth." That night, after a simple dinner, Riven insisted on checking the cottage's defenses. He moved methodically from window to door, testing latches, examining sight lines, considering approaches and exits. I watched him work, struck by the contrast between his powerful presence and the humble surroundings of my home. "We should sleep in shifts," he said finally, returning to the main room where I sat by the fire. "I'll take first watch." "You still need to heal," I protested. "The silver poisoning is receding, thanks to your care." He settled into the chair opposite mine, his long legs stretched toward the hearth. "But you're right that I'm not at full strength. All the more reason to be vigilant." I studied him in the firelight, noting the lines of exhaustion around his eyes despite his attempts to hide them. "At least let me check your wounds before I rest." He acquiesced with a nod, and I gathered my healing supplies. The burns looked better, still red and angry, but the blackened veins had receded further. As I applied fresh salve to the wounds, I found myself hyper-aware of his skin beneath my fingers, the controlled power in the muscles that tensed and relaxed at my touch. "Your hands are trembling," he observed quietly. I didn't look up from my work. "It's been an eventful day, indeed." He caught one of my hands in his, stilling its motion. "Are you afraid, Elena?" The question was direct, leaving no room for evasion. I met his gaze, finding no judgment there, only genuine inquiry. "Yes," I admitted, "but not of you." His expression softened. "Good. Because from this day forward, I am the last person in this world you need fear." As I finished treating his wounds, a comfortable silence fell between us. The claiming had created something new, not quite trust, not yet, but the foundation for it. A mutual recognition that whatever happened next, we would face it as allies, rather than strangers. Later, as I prepared for sleep, I removed my grandmother's pendant from around my neck, holding it in my palm for a moment. The carved symbols seemed to shimmer in the low light, ancient protections against unseen dangers. "That's an unusual piece," Riven commented from his position by the window, where he had positioned himself to watch the approaches to the cottage. I glanced up, surprised he had noticed the pendant from across the room. "It was my grandmother's. She said it's been passed down through our family for generations." Riven extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I placed the pendant in his palm. He examined it carefully, running his thumb over the intricate symbols carved into the aged wood. "These are old markings," he said, his voice taking on a tone of reverence I hadn't heard from him before. "Protection sigils from before the Great Pack Wars, when magic flowed more freely among our kind." I sat beside him, curiosity overcoming my wariness. "You recognize them?" "Some. This one," he traced a spiral pattern near the center, "represents healing. And this," his finger moved to a series of interlocking triangles, "is for shielding against ill intent." His eyes met mine, something like wonder in their amber depths. "Your grandmother was more than just a healer, wasn't she?" The question touched on secrets I'd kept close, things my grandmother had shared in whispers during the darkest nights of winter. "She called herself a keeper," I said quietly. "She said our bloodline was tasked with preserving old knowledge when others sought to destroy it." Riven nodded slowly. "That explains much. The Council has long sought to eliminate those with connections to the old ways. They fear what they cannot control." "Is that why they helped Varen betray you? Because you threatened their control?" His laugh was bitter. "Partly. I refused to enforce their edicts in my territory. Their restrictions on who could learn certain skills, which bloodlines could hold power. The Western territories under my rule became a haven for those who valued merit over birth." He handed the pendant back to me. "Keep this close. Its protections may prove more valuable than you know." I slipped the cord over my head, feeling the familiar weight of the pendant settle against my skin. My grandmother said something similar before she died, that it would shield me when I needed it most. She was right. Riven's expression grew distant, as if seeing something beyond the cottage walls. "Rest now, Elena. Dawn will come soon enough, and with it, new challenges." I retreated to my small bedroom, but sleep eluded me despite my exhaustion. Through the thin wall, I could hear Riven moving occasionally, his vigilant presence both reassuring and unsettling. So much had changed in the space of a day. I had gone from invisible Omega to the claimed protectee of a powerful Alpha. The Council emissaries were coming, perhaps bringing hunters with them. And beneath it all, ran the current of connection between Riven and myself, undefined but undeniable. When I finally drifted to sleep, my dreams were vivid and strange. I ran through forests I'd never seen, pursued by shadows with silver eyes. Just as they were about to overtake me, a massive dark wolf appeared at my side, his presence driving back the shadows. We ran together then, synchronized in our movements, the forest opening before us like a welcoming embrace. I woke to early morning light and the smell of cooking. Following the scent to the kitchen, I found Riven preparing a simple meal of eggs and bread. He had found my small store of provisions, and somehow made them look more appetizing than when I prepared them myself. "You cook," I observed, unable to keep the surprise from my voice. He glanced up, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Did you think alphas incapable of feeding themselves?" Or perhaps you imagined we only consume raw meat torn from still struggling prey. My cheeks warmed at his teasing. I've never known an alpha well enough to learn their cooking habits. Then consider this the first of many revelations. He set a plate before me. Eat. We have plans to make before the emissaries arrive. Over breakfast, Riven outlined his thoughts. We would attend the formal reception for the council emissaries together, presenting a united front while gathering information about their intentions. The claiming would protect me from immediate repercussions, but we needed to be prepared for more subtle threats. What about you? I asked. Won't they recognize you immediately? Undoubtedly. But they won't act against me openly. Not here in another Alpha's territory without clear provocation. That would violate too many ancient laws, destabilize the fragile peace between packs. His expression darkened. They'll try other methods first, offers, threats, perhaps attempts to separate us. And if those fail, then we'll see what sort of Alpha Thorn truly is. One who upholds the sanctity of his territory against outside interference, or one who bends to the council's will. The village was transformed when we arrived that afternoon. Banners hung from buildings, and pack members wore their finest clothes. The arrival of council emissaries was clearly a significant event, worthy of ceremony and display. I felt conspicuous in my simple blue dress, the nicest I owned, but nowhere near as elaborate as what others wore. Riven, however, carried himself with such natural authority that his plain clothes seemed irrelevant. He walked beside me, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back, his presence drawing eyes wherever we went. The crowd parted for us, whispers following in our wake. The central square had been arranged for the reception, with Thorn and Serena seated on elevated chairs at one end. Beside them were 3 empty seats, presumably for the expected emissaries. Pack members gathered in loose groups, their hierarchical standings determining their proximity to the alpha pair. I hesitated, uncertain where we should position ourselves. As an Omega, I would normally remain at the very fringes of such gatherings. But Riven guided me confidently to a space not far from the central seats, close enough to observe everything, yet slightly apart from the main pack groupings. "They're coming," someone murmured, and a hush fell over the square. The council emissaries entered with ceremonial precision, 2 males flanking a female, all wearing the distinctive silver-embroidered cloaks that marked their station. I felt Riven tense beside me, his hand pressing slightly firmer against my back. "The woman is Liana," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "She was once Varen's mentor. The others are her puppets." Thorn rose to greet the emissaries with formal words of welcome. Serena beside him, all gracious smiles and practiced charm. The rituals of greeting seemed to stretch endlessly. Formal acknowledgments, ritualized responses, the careful dance of power disguised as courtesy. Throughout it all, I felt Liana's gaze repeatedly finding us in the crowd, her expression revealing nothing even as her attention fixed on Riven. She was striking rather than beautiful, with sharp features and calculating eyes that missed nothing. When the formalities concluded, Thorn announced a feast to honor their guests. As the gathering began to disperse toward the long tables set up nearby, Liana made her move. "What an unexpected pleasure," she said, her voice carrying just far enough to freeze the nearby conversations. "Riven of the Western Territories, we had heard rumors of your liberation." All eyes turned to us. Riven inclined his head slightly, the gesture containing neither respect nor submission. "Emissary Liana, still delivering the council's messages after all these years." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "And still finding you at the center of disruption, it seems." Her gaze shifted to me, assessing and dismissive in a single glance. "Though your taste in company has grown interesting." I felt rather than saw Riven's subtle shift in posture, a coiling of tension, a readiness that communicated danger to anyone attuned to such signals. "My claimed protectee," he said, his voice deceptively mild. "Elena, healer of the Northern Pack." Liana's eyebrows rose fractionally. "A claiming? How very traditional of you, Riven." "I wouldn't have expected such adherence to the old ways from one who has flouted so many others. I honor the traditions that deserve honoring," he replied. "Just as I reject those based solely on maintaining power for the few at the expense of the many." The political undercurrents were clear even to me. This was a continuation of long-standing conflicts, with Riven representing a challenge to the Council's authority and Liana defending the established order. "The Council has issued a directive regarding your status," Liana said, her tone shifting to formal pronouncement. "You are to return with us to answer charges of oath-breaking and territorial abandonment." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Such charges were serious, carrying penalties ranging from public humiliation to execution, depending on the Council's judgment. "I abandoned nothing," Riven replied, his voice hardening. "My territory was taken through treachery and forbidden magic, with the Council's tacit approval. If anyone should answer charges, it is Varen and those who aided him." Liana's smile turned cold. "These accusations can be addressed in a formal hearing. After you return with us, I think not." Riven's refusal was calm but absolute. "I have claimed protection duties here. They take precedence over the Council's political maneuverings." Thorn stepped forward then, clearly uncomfortable with this confrontation occurring in his territory. "Perhaps such matters can be discussed after the feast. We have prepared a celebration in honor of the emissary's arrival." "Of course," Liana agreed smoothly. "We wouldn't want to disrupt your hospitality, Alpha Thorn." Her eyes lingered on me, though I would be most interested in speaking privately with the healer at some point. I have questions about this unusual claiming. The threat was veiled but unmistakable. Before I could respond, Riven's arm slipped around my waist, drawing me subtly closer to his side. "Elena remains with me," he said simply. The tension between them was palpable, breaking only when Serena intervened with practiced diplomatic skill, guiding Liana toward the feast tables with empty pleasantries. As we moved to join the gathering, Riven kept me close. "She'll try to separate us," he murmured. "Stay within my sight at all times." The feast progressed with surface cordiality masking underlying tensions. I picked at my food, appetite diminished by the awareness of Liana's occasional glances in our direction. Riven ate sparingly as well, his attention seemingly on the conversations around us, while his body remained attuned to any potential threat. As twilight approached, musicians began to play, and some pack members moved to a cleared area for dancing. The celebration grew more relaxed as wine flowed freely. Even Thorn seemed to unbend somewhat, laughing at something one of the male emissaries said. "I need to visit the healing tent," I whispered to Riven. Several villagers had asked earlier if I would bring remedies for minor ailments, and I had promised to check on an elder with a persistent cough. "It will only take a moment," he frowned, clearly reluctant to let me out of his sight. "I'll accompany you." "To the women's healing area?" I raised an eyebrow. That would cause more gossip than even our claiming. After a moment's consideration, he nodded. "Go, but return quickly, and take this." He pressed something small and cold into my palm, a silver whistle on a thin chain. "If you need me, use it. I'll hear it above any other sound." The healing tent was quieter than the main celebration, with several women seeking remedies or advice. I worked efficiently, distributing the herbs I had brought, and checking on the elder, whose cough had improved with my previous treatment. I was just finishing when the tent flap opened, and Liana entered. "Healer," she said, dismissing the other women with a gesture that none dared disobey. "I believe we have matters to discuss." My heart pounded, but I kept my expression neutral as I packed my remaining supplies. "I should return to the feast. Riven will be waiting." "Yes, you're Alpha." She moved closer, studying me with those calculating eyes. "Tell me, how does an Omega with no standing come to purchase and claim the protection of one of the most powerful Alphas in the territories?" "The circumstances were unusual," I replied, trying to edge toward the tent entrance. She blocked my path with casual grace. "Indeed, so unusual that one might suspect other factors at work." Her hand shot out suddenly, grasping the pendant at my throat. Factors such as this. Pain seared through me at her touch, not physical but something deeper. As if she reached through the pendant into my very essence, I gasped, stumbling backward. "As I thought," she said, satisfaction coloring her voice. "A keeper's charm. Your grandmother was a Lara of the Eastern Forest, wasn't she? We've been searching for her bloodline since she disappeared." The mention of my grandmother's true name, one I had never heard spoken aloud, sent shock through me. I don't know what you're talking about, I managed. Don't you? Leanna's smile was predatory now. The last of a bloodline that carries old magic in their veins, a healer whose skills go beyond herbs and poultices. The council has been looking for you for a very long time, little keeper. My fingers closed around the silver whistle in my pocket, but before I could raise it to my lips, Leanna's hand clamped over mine. I wouldn't, she warned. This conversation need not become unpleasant. The council can offer you protection far beyond what a fallen alpha can provide. Resources to develop your inherited gifts. A place of respect. In exchange for what? I asked, already knowing the answer. Information about Riven's plans. Testimony against him at a council hearing. And eventually, your skills in service to our cause rather than wasted in this backwater pack. I thought of Riven, his honor, his refusal to bend to those who abused power, the gentle way he had tended the fire in my cottage that morning. I thought of my grandmother, who had hidden her true identity to protect me from people exactly like Leanna. No, I said simply. Leanna's expression hardened. You don't understand what you're refusing. The council doesn't make such offers lightly, nor does it take rejection well. I understand perfectly, I replied, finding strength in certainty. My answer remains no. Then perhaps more direct measures are required. She raised her hand, and I saw silver glinting between her fingers. A small knife with runes etched along its blade. In that moment, everything seemed to slow. I felt the pendant grow warm against my skin, pulsing with energy I had never fully understood, but had always sensed. My grandmother's voice seemed to whisper in my ear. Power isn't always about strength, little one. As Leanna moved toward me, I didn't back away. Instead, I grasped the pendant firmly and spoke the words my grandmother had taught me long ago, words I had been told to use only in moments of greatest need. They flowed from my lips in a language I didn't understand, but somehow knew, ancient syllables that seemed to vibrate in the air between us. Light flared from the pendant, bright enough to momentarily blind. Leanna cried out, stumbling backward, the silver knife falling from her fingers. I seized the moment to bring the whistle to my lips, its piercing call cutting through the night. The tent flap tore open almost instantly, revealing Riven, his eyes glowing with alpha power, his body poised for attack. Behind him, I could see the feast had dissolved into chaos, with pack members rising in confusion and the other emissaries looking around wildly for the source of the disturbance. She knows, I gasped, pointing to Leanna, who was regaining her composure, though her eyes remained fixed on my pendant with newfound wariness about my grandmother, about the keepers. Understanding flashed across Riven's face. In 3 strides, he was between Leanna and me, his presence filling the small tent with barely contained violence. You have violated the sanctity of a claiming bond and threatened my protectee on pack-neutral ground, he growled, each word precise and deadly. Even the council cannot ignore such a breach of ancient law. Leanna straightened, her dignity reassembling itself like armor. The council recognizes no claiming between an alpha and a keeper witch, she spat. Her kind were sentenced to extinction generations ago for their defiance. And yet here she stands, Riven replied, a dangerous smile touching his lips. As do I. Perhaps the council's power isn't as absolute as you believe. Thorn pushed into the tent then, flanked by his most trusted betas. What is the meaning of this disruption? He demanded, though his voice faltered as he took in the tableau before him. Leanna's fury, Riven's protective stance, the silver knife gleaming on the ground between them. Your emissary has attacked my claimed protectee, Riven stated flatly, with a silver blade on neutral territory, violating every code of diplomatic conduct. Thorn's gaze fell to the knife, recognition dawning in his eyes. Such weapons were forbidden, except in the execution of council-sanctioned punishments. For an emissary to carry one, much less use it in another alpha's territory, was an unforgivable breach. Is this true? He asked Leanna, his voice hardening with each word. The girl is a keeper witch, she replied, as if this explained and justified everything. Her existence violates council edicts from the time of the Great Purge. To my surprise, Thorn's expression didn't shift to disgust or fear at this revelation. Instead, something like understanding crossed his features as he looked at me with new eyes. "My mother was saved by a keeper during the mountain wars," he said quietly. "When council healers declared her wounds untreatable, a keeper woman drew the poison from her blood, with methods they called forbidden." He turned to Liana. "I will not allow council persecution to resume in my territory, regardless of ancient edicts." The declaration hung in the air, momentous and unexpected. I saw shock register on the faces of all present. This was Thorn taking a stand that placed him in direct opposition to council authority, aligning himself with Riven's position rather than the established power structure. Liana's composure cracked, revealing the rage beneath. "You would shelter a keeper and a renegade alpha? The council will not forget this treachery. Nor will the Western territories forget who stood with their true alpha when he was most vulnerable," Riven countered, his voice carrying beyond the tent to where many pack members had gathered. "Nor will the southern packs, who have long resented council interference in their breeding programs. Nor will the eastern clans, who lost many of their best healers to your purges." He stepped closer to Liana, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated with power. "The tide is turning, emissary. The question is whether the council will turn with it or be swept away." In that moment, I saw what had made Riven such a formidable alpha. Not just his physical strength or dominance, but his ability to transform a personal confrontation into a rallying point, to articulate the resentments and hopes of many in a way that created bonds where none had existed before. Thorn seemed to sense it too, for he moved to stand beside Riven, rather than between the combatants. "The emissaries will depart at dawn," he announced, his decision clearly made. "Until then, they will be confined to their assigned quarters for their own safety." Liana looked from Thorn to Riven to me, calculation replacing rage as she assessed her diminishing options. "This isn't over," she said finally. "The council doesn't forgive defiance." "Neither do I," Riven replied simply. As the guards escorted Liana away, the gathered crowd began to disperse, voices raised in excited discussion of what had transpired. Thorn turned to us, his expression grave but resolute. "You should both leave tonight," he said quietly. "The council will send hunters next, not diplomats. I can delay them, perhaps mislead them, but eventually they will come in force." Riven nodded, acknowledging the risk Thorn was taking. "You've chosen a difficult path, Alpha Thorn. Perhaps. Or perhaps I've finally chosen the right one." Thorn's gaze shifted to me. "My mother always said that when the Keepers returned, it would herald a time of great change for all packs. I never understood what she meant until tonight." An hour later, Riven and I had gathered what few possessions we could carry and stood at the edge of the Northern Pack's territory. Before us stretched the wild forests that would eventually lead to the Western territories, to Riven's home and the pack that had been taken from him. "Are you certain?" he asked, studying my face in the moonlight. "This path will not be easy. The council will hunt us. Varen will send his best trackers. We may be running for a very long time." I touched the pendant at my throat, feeling its steady warmth. No longer a mystery, but a birthright I was only beginning to understand. "My grandmother said our bloodline has always walked difficult paths. That's why we were chosen as keepers in the first place." Riven smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his severe features into something unexpectedly beautiful. His hand came up to cup my cheek, the touch gentle despite the strength I knew resided in those fingers. "The Omega healer and the fallen Alpha," he mused. "Not the allies anyone would have predicted in this fight." "Perhaps that's our advantage," I replied, leaning slightly into his touch. "No one expects the unexpected." He nodded, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone, in a gesture that had already become familiar. "Together, then." "Together," I agreed. As we turned to face the wilderness before us, the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, painting the world in shades of promise. I had spent my last coins to save an alpha from auction, never imagining that in doing so, I was also claiming my own destiny. What had begun as an impulsive act of compassion had transformed into something far greater, a bond between unlikely allies, a defiance against corrupt power, and perhaps the first steps toward healing wounds that had divided our kind for generations. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers I could only begin to imagine. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking it alone. And that made all the difference.